profesor Lessig će održati predavanje Slobodna kultura, koja će dati kratak uvod u tom što je pozadina samog projekta Creative Commons, ali i što je zapravo pozadina globalnog pokreta za slobodnu kulturu.
So, let's imagine there's a bunch of content created, and we didn't know quite how to think about this content, but it just filled our space as stuff we could look to build on. All of this stuff all around us. More and more than we could count for. There's lots of music in the background, isn't it? But let's say it's all here, right? This is the last bit. Now this content we can think of as the way the world was before the digital era came. And you see this content sitting here in beautiful green color, meaning green for freedom. Freedom to use the content in lots of ways without the permission of anyone first. Now, inside this little green, there are tiny little red dots that symbolize those uses for which you need permission. There are some. But in the tradition that defines the tradition I would call a free culture, they were few. The default was freedom, and for those who believe in freedom, this world produced a happy picture. Now that world has changed. It's changed because this default of freedom for the content that we find all around us is increasingly governed by a different regime of control. A regime where the default now is ask permission first. Of course, as in the other case, there are some small instances, fair uses, where you don't need permission. But the default is now control. And the person eager to embrace the tradition of a free culture thinks of this as a sad story. So what do we do in response? That's the question. Well, the obvious response is to set some of this creativity free, to find a way to set it free. And that freedom could take some of this content otherwise under control and make it available for others to build on, to find a simple way to mark this content with this freedom. Now that's the objective of the Creative Commons project, to find a simple way to mark content with freedom, the freedom that the authors intended to carry, so that those who come across it know the things they are granted the freedom to do up front without asking permission first. So you go to our website, you're given the option of selecting a license. The license gives you some simple choices. For example, do you want to allow commercial use of your work? Do you want to allow modification of your work? And depending on these choices, you get a Creative Commons license. That license comes in 3 separate layers. One is a human-readable commons deed, an expression of the freedoms that go with your license in a way that anybody's supposed to be able to understand. Second, very different, is a lawyer-readable license, a billion-page document written by some of the best lawyers around the world that guarantee the freedoms that go with this content. And third is a machine-readable expression of the freedoms so that computers can begin to search and gather content on the basis of the freedoms that get associated with that content. Now these 3 layers together are crucial. It is crucial that they come in this linked way to make the freedoms understandable, unchallengeable, and usable in a digital age. So for example, here's one way this has worked. Colin Mutchler's a guitarist. He composed this guitar track. He named it My Life. He donated it to the sound resource that makes all music available under a Creative Commons license. A 17-year-old guitarist named Cora Beth downloaded the track, and she added this violin track on top. She renamed it My Life Changed and donated it back to the archive. And And it became a symbol of what this project was intending to enable. Two people who had never met each other, who had no contact prior to the creative contact of this creativity. And it has inspired a host of follow-on examples of this creativity. I was just sent this one today from this group Triad. Here's another modified version of this.
I don't know what they've done to get there.
Appropriately enough, this is now named Our Lives Changed, inviting more people to take this and to remix it and release it to others, to make exactly the same kind of creativity. It's a picture of how creativity works, and it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle to people I've trained for a living, number one, lawyers. Right? Because here's the weird thing about all the creativity you've seen. All of this creativity so far was produced without any lawyer standing between the two creators. This was creativity that happened legally without any permission being required up front, free of legal restrictions because the freedoms were built into the content itself. Now, in October last year, this idea was exploded by Wired magazine in a CD released on Wired magazine. Every Wired magazine had this CD bundled inside it, where 16 artists, including David Byrne, Gilberto Gil, the Beastie Boys, Chuck D, Paul Westerberg, a whole host of amazing artists released their content under a license that gives people the right to sample or remix the content. So the Beastie Boys invited people to take this content and to make it available so others are allowed to remix it, even sell the content that they have remixed. These rights have been given away by people who believe creativity happens like this, by taking and building on other people's. This then inspired this site called Mixture, which takes all of this music available for people to remix and puts it in a frame, much the way Friendster tries to organize friendship, so that you can see who's mixed your work and you can see where your work grows in other people's content. So for example, here's one artist whose work, Short-Faced Bear, whose work here, Holiday Out Acapella, is used in, you can see it's used in this second song. Here's another example of
and 1, 2, 3.
a hip-hop that's using all of those to sample the work to produce this one. So building on all of these other artists to produce this art. This is the idea behind remix culture. That people have the tools, both legal tools and technical tools, to enable them to take from art that's out there, that artists have signaled they want to be free, and to remix it into something different, something more powerful than what they produce on their own. And this project, to enable the remix culture, is what Creative Commons is about. Now, when it started in a small way in the United States. Its idea was to facilitate these licenses there. But very quickly, a project started called the iCommons Project. Its objective was to take this and to spread it to countries around the world. So right now, there are over 60 countries around the world that are porting the licenses from the Creative Commons Project into their local jurisdictions. And so far, countries such as Brazil, Germany, France, Taiwan, and a host of other countries have already launched their licenses. And of course, tonight, we celebrate Croatia's entry into that field of countries that have released licenses under the Creative Commons Project. Here's the Croatia, the beginning of the billion-page long Croatian license, which is fit to this form. Now, I have traveled here tonight because I want to first thank these people who made this possible, and I want to ask you to help me thank the people who made this possible, this recording. In this moment, we're going to cut this class. Of carrying these projects of freedom around the world is the most important thing that Creative Commons is trying to do, to set a common standard of freedom that people rally around, to resist another vision of what creativity ought to be about. Now, people know me to be a kind of pessimistic and dark sort, and then they come to me and they say, look what Creative Commons is doing, doesn't this make you happy? Doesn't this make you optimistic about the future? It's a good question. Should one be happy and optimistic now as we see countries like Croatia all around the world doing exactly this that we have said, the idea of spreading this content freely? Of course, we haven't won this struggle yet. We haven't won this struggle yet, and increasingly the battle is being framed in terms that make it clear which side we should be on. So, for example, in Christmas last year, an article appeared in Billboard magazine, which is a kind of apologist for Hollywood magazine, describing the Creative Commons project. This is what it said. A copyright theory called Creative Commons, promoted by an organization of copyright practitioners and academics, has emerged as a serious threat to the entertainment industry, says Michael Sukin, founder of the IAEL, a serious threat. The nonprofit organization, also known as Creative Commons, urges creators to give up their copyright. Of course, nothing we do urges anybody to give up any copyright. We urge people to use their copyright to enable freedom in the use of their work, but Billboard sees it as giving up the copyright. This position has spread like a virus onto the international stage, Sukin explains, with anti-copyright forces adopting these arguments against the music industry. If the theory is accepted by legislators, copyright laws could change. Oh no. Copyright owners could lose protections, and U.S. copyright income could be at risk, he says. Now you might wonder, who is the IAEL? Michael Sukin, spokesman for this organization. The IAEL is the International Association of Entertainment Lawyers. So you might have worried, is this the empire striking back? No, it's more like the imps for hire strike back. Imps, as these tiny little lawyers hired to defend the interests of whom, is the question. Whose interests are threatened here? Because as authors choose not to hire lawyers to enable others to use their content, it's not U.S. copyright income that's threatened, it's U.S. lawyers' income that is threatened. The real enemy here is not the copyright owners. The enemy here is those who insist the only way in which you're allowed to spread your creativity is by asking a lawyer first, and those who believe the only way you should be allowed to build on other people's creativity is by asking a lawyer first. Those are the ones threatened by our change. But it's not just these imps threatened by the change. Just last week, our favorite Mr. Gates at the CES conference in 2005 said this about the debate we're talking about here. There's some new, modern-day sort of communists who want to get rid of the incentive for musicians and movie makers and software makers under various guises. They don't think that incentives should exist. Communists, we are. Communists. Now, is it really communism we're talking about here? Right? Remember, whatever Marx said, communism was the world where all property was owned by the state. Right? We don't want the state to own property. Remember, fascism, that was the world where all property was owned by monopoly corporations. Now, I wouldn't say misapplies in that particular context, but that's what some would describe as the world of operating systems, for example. We're neither communists nor fascists in this sense. What this movement is about is something different, not these two ideals, but maybe this ideal, communism. Not communism, communism, communists is who we are, people who believe that these acts of artists producing and sharing their freedom are what make art work. Culture is the process of building on those who created before, and that practice of building and sharing and spreading culture coexists with a properly balanced system of intellectual property to make sure people can earn the income they need to survive in this market. These two go together. Communists, not this guy, who isn't a communist. But Jefferson, in our tradition, was the first great communist. John Perry Barlow was one. Even Jack Valenti, I should go back to this for a second, endorsed Creative Commons when Creative Commons was launched. Gilberto Gil, in a concert in New York, turned over a bunch of his content to the Creative Commons movement. David Byrne, the inspiration for thinking differently about how one enables others to build on our culture, too, has joined this movement. Over 5 million linkbacks to digital objects exist out there on the web in the name of this communism movement, and we are extremely honored today to add one more country to the list of those who have joined this movement of communists. That's what CC is about. So we may be a serious threat, but let us be a serious threat to lawyers in America. We may be a virus, but if we're a virus, then let us be a virus that enables artists to spread culture, to spread and build free culture. A tradition that every culture knows. A tradition of building culture by building on the creativity that went before. That's what this movement is designed to enable, this free culture. That's our ideal. You are making it work. I am extraordinarily grateful for that. I have just had a son. He's now 14 months old. And I've had a great opportunity to reflect on what it means to be a father, which is very different from what I understood a father to be before. Right? Actually, a father is this person who participates in this extraordinary process just at the very beginning. It's a lot of fun at the very beginning, for one night or something like that. And then the mother does the work for the next chunk of time. That's the way it works. And that's the way I feel about the Creative Commons movement. Right? We had a lot of fun at the very beginning thinking about this idea, getting it going. But what's happened is that this idea has been picked up and spread across the world by those who recognize that the claims of those who say they speak for artists when they speak for lawyers, and those who claim to speak for artists when they speak for one way of making money from the 20th century, are not the claims we ought to be defending in countries around the world, but instead, we ought to be defending the practice that has always been our practice, enabled by these technologies to find different ways to produce and spread this culture. And thank you for coming out. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm grateful again to everyone who's helped this movement take off here. Thanks.